Saint Camillus de Lellis was born on May 25, 1550, in the small town of Bucanico, located in the Abruzzo region of Italy. From an early age, his life was marked by great trials and challenges. His father, Giovanni de Lellis, was a soldier who spent long periods away from home, serving in the army. His mother, Camilla Campelli de Loreto, was a pious woman who dreamed of seeing her son follow the path of virtue. When he was still a child, Camillus lost his mother, an experience that caused him a deep emotional wound. Lacking a maternal figure, he grew up with an unstable education and under the influence of soldiers and adventurers. This setting ended up shaping an undisciplined and rebellious temperament that, in his youth, would manifest itself in many disordered behaviors. His father wanted him to follow a military career, and thus Camillus grew up with a warrior and impulsive spirit. While still a teenager, he began to accompany his father on some military campaigns, acquiring a taste for combat and an adventurous life. At the same time, he showed a certain indifference toward religious practices, distancing himself from anything that reminded him of virtue and devotion. With his father's death, Camillus inherited few possessions and began to live a wandering life. With no clear goals, he gave himself over to gambling, fights, and every kind of disorder. In his early 20s, he was already known as a compulsive gambler and a violent man, someone living on the margins of Christian values. At that time, Camillus contracted a wound on his foot that became chronic and would accompany him throughout his life. Curiously, this illness would become the providential instrument of his conversion. Seeking treatment, he went to several institutions, including the Hospital of St. James of the Incurables in Rome. During his stay in that hospital, Camillus observed the situation of the sick and, for the first time, felt a strange interior discomfort. That human misery, the pain and loneliness of the patients, touched something deep in his heart. Yet he soon returned to his former life of sin, still unable to break with his vices. Around 1574, Camillus decided to enlist in a military company fighting against the Turks. He saw in this new venture a way to start over, but he ended up sinking even deeper into debt and moral disorder. After failing again, he wandered the roads of Italy, begging and gambling. At 25, when he already seemed directionless, Camillus was welcomed by the Capuchin friars of Manfredonia. There, God intervened decisively in his life. One of the friars, perceiving his anguish, began to speak with him about the meaning of existence and the need for sincere conversion. Those words, combined with the humiliation of his situation and the pain of his wound, penetrated his spirit. In the silence of the convent, Camillus felt the weight of his sins and wept bitterly. For the first time, he wanted to break with his history of self-destruction. There, the flame of his vocation was kindled. Moved by this impulse to change, he decided to surrender himself totally to God's mercy. On February 2, 1575, Camillus made a general confession, recounting all his faults. This sincere and profound act marked the beginning of a radical transformation that would lead him to holiness. Even so, the interior struggle did not end. Many times he felt the weight of the old temptations, especially the desire to return to gambling. Yet now there was a new strength in his heart that gave him the courage to resist. Camillus experienced the grace of conversion as a daily process. After partially recovering his health, he returned to St. James Hospital, this time as a servant of the sick. His work, once superficial, became full of dedication. He began to treat each patient as a living image of the suffering Christ. That experience transformed his heart and gave him a new purpose. Contact with others suffering became a true divine call. Camillus realized that his past of pain and failure now made sense. All that had prepared him to have compassion for the most abandoned and to recognize in each of them the face of the Lord. Over time, he took on the role of infirmary supervisor. His energy and zeal soon caught the administrator's attention. He sought to keep the environment clean and respectful, something rare in the hospitals of the time, where negligence and indifference reigned. His dedication was so complete that the other employees felt embarrassed. Many were amazed at his willingness to serve even the most repulsive cases. Camillus did not hesitate to perform tasks considered humiliating, such as washing purulent wounds or cleaning filthy beds. While serving in the hospital, he felt an increasing desire to consecrate himself entirely to God. Even though he had little formal education, he considered becoming a priest. This inspiration was strengthened through prayer and the advice of the Capuchin friars. In 1579, Camillus decided to take a bold step. He enrolled in the Roman college, run by the Jesuits, to begin his priestly formation. He was nearly 30 and poorly educated, but he trusted that God would make up for his limitations. The years of study were full of sacrifices. The wound on his foot often forced him to stay in bed for days. Even so, he did not give up. He endured the pain and humiliation with patience, convinced that his mission depended on that preparation. During that time, he matured the idea of creating a congregation dedicated to caring for the sick. He saw that hospital care required not only technical competence, but true Christian charity. For Camillus, caring for the patient was touching Christ himself. This conviction would become the spiritual foundation of the work that was about to be born. He dreamed of gathering men willing to love the sick with the same intensity with which Christ loved humanity. The inspiration to found a new order did not arise from ambition, but from experience gained in serving the frailest. He saw that no human regulation could replace the impulse of charity. Little by little, some companions drew near to his ideal. Together, they began to organize more humane and dignified services in Rome's hospitals. This small fraternity was the seed of the ministers of the sick. As his project matured, Camillus sought to consecrate himself more and more through prayer. He spent long hours before the tabernacle, asking for the strength needed to persevere. In 1584, he was finally ordained a priest. It was a moment of great joy and gratitude, for he felt that God had transformed his past into a source of sanctification. From that point on, Saint Camillus became not only a servant of the sick, but also the spiritual guide of his future congregation. His example of humility and compassion would forever mark the Church's history. Immediately after his priestly ordination, Saint Camillus de Lellis devoted himself completely to realizing his great ideal, founding a community of men totally consecrated to the service of the sick. This dream, born during his conversion, grew more urgent in his heart each day. He understood that charity could not be an occasional action but a way of life. In 1586, with the approval of Pope Sixtus V, the Congregation of the Ministers of the Sick was officially established, better known as the Order of the Camillians. The name clearly reflected the mission of its members: to be ministers of God's love in the bodily and spiritual care of the sick. From the beginning, Camillus insisted that assistance to the sick be united to a deep spirit of prayer and penance. He believed that human love alone was not enough to sustain daily dedication to extreme situations of suffering. Charity had to spring from a heart in love with Christ. One of the most beautiful features of his work was the innovation in hospital care. At a time when patients were often treated with neglect, the Camillians introduced hygiene practices, organization, and affectionate proximity. Attention to detail and respect for human dignity were non-negotiable principles. Camillus used to say that hospitals should be houses of God and schools of virtue. For him, the infirmary was a place of sanctification, both for those who served and for those who suffered. This spiritual outlook transformed environments once seen as warehouses of the dying into spaces of hope and consolation. The distinctive sign of the new congregation was a large red cross on the black habit. This symbol, which still identifies the Camillians today, recalled Christ's self-sacrifice on Calvary and the mission of carrying the neighbor's cross with love. Camillus believed that only those who embraced the cross could truly console the sick. From the start, community life was marked by rigorous discipline. Members made vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but they also took a specific vow of dedication to the sick, even if it endangered their own lives. It was a radical commitment that many considered imprudent. Camillus, however, was not afraid of the risks. He said he preferred to die serving Christ in the sick than to live in comfort. This courage inspired his companions and countless laypeople to collaborate with the work. As the congregation grew, Camillus frequently traveled to Rome, Naples, and other cities, supervising hospitals and founding new houses. Every place he visited was transformed by his example of tenderness and firmness. Trials were not lacking. Many criticized his way of acting, deeming it exaggerated or unworkable. Some hospital administrators resisted the changes, bothered by the demand to treat the poor well. Nevertheless, Camillus remained undaunted. During a great plague epidemic in Rome, he and his religious distinguished themselves by heroically assisting the victims. While many fled for fear of contagion, the Camillians stayed by the dying, caring for their bodies and saving their souls. This testimony moved the entire city and consolidated the congregation's reputation. People of various social classes recognized that such service was not mere philanthropy, but the fruit of a living, ardent faith. Camillus was also known for his gift of spiritual consolation. He had a unique way of speaking with the sick, conveying serenity and trust in God's mercy. Many patients, once desperate, regained inner peace after listening to him. In the most difficult moments, when resources or strength were lacking, St. Camillus prayed with renewed confidence. He firmly believed that Providence never abandons those who devote themselves entirely to their neighbor. To keep his religious from falling into cold routine, he insisted that every gesture be done out of love. He said it was useless to offer medicines and food if the heart was distant. Each patient had to be seen as a brother. Besides material care, Camillus zealously provided spiritual assistance. He promoted frequent reception of the sacraments, prayer, and guidance of consciences. He knew that the greatest healing was the salvation of the soul. While founding hospitals, Camillus did not neglect his own sanctification. He spent hours in meditation, fasted frequently, and slept little. His body, marked by illness, was sustained by an inner strength that came from faith. Despite physical weakness, he displayed surprising energy. Those who knew him marveled at his ability to work entire days without complaining. This disposition inspired his companions and edified all who met him. The Camillians began to expand their mission beyond Italy. Over time, the congregation spread to other parts of Europe, bringing St. Camillus's ideal to places where suffering was even more intense. Witnessed by the first religious was decisive in establishing the work's reputation. Many died from epidemics they faced alongside the sick, giving their lives out of love. Camillus regarded each such member as a martyr of charity. He said those who died serving the sick received a special crown in heaven, reserved for those who loved to the extreme. The congregation's early years were marked by constant financial difficulties. Even so, Camillus never hesitated to accept new patients or open new houses. He trusted completely that God would provide everything at the right time. That unwavering confidence was one of his greatest virtues. Even when there seemed no way out, he never lost peace. His example taught the brothers to abandon themselves entirely to divine providence. Eventually, Pope Clement VIII definitively approved the congregation, granting it official recognition. This confirmed that the work was not merely human, but inspired by the Holy Spirit. Papal approval gave new impetus to the order's expansion. For Camillus, however, true joy was not prestige, but the certainty that every new hospital meant another space where Christ would be loved in his suffering members. Over the years, St. Camillus became a respected figure both in the church and in civil society. His name was associated with silent heroism and boundless goodness. He became a symbol of compassion in an era of wars, plagues, and abandonment of the weak. One quality that impressed his contemporaries most was his humility. Though superior and founder, Camillus insisted on performing the simplest services. Upon arriving at a hospital, he sought out the gravest cases, the ones everyone avoided. His heart seemed unable to harden before suffering. Often he knelt by the dying, holding their hand until their last breath. For him, no patient should die alone, without the comfort of a brother in faith. Camillus's zeal was not limited to physical care. He deeply cared about salvation of souls. He organized teams of religious and priests to hear confessions, administer anointing, and prepare the sick for their final encounter with God. Historical accounts say many people, moved by how they were treated, asked forgiveness for sins and returned to the faith. The Camillian's presence was a true evangelizing mission that transformed hearts. Camillus understood that illness, though painful, could be an occasion for conversion. He taught his religious to see, in moments of greatest human misery, an opportunity to bring light and hope. This supernatural vision marked all his spirituality. As his health declined, Camillus prepared his companions for the future. He gathered them frequently to urge fidelity to the spirit of charity that founded the congregation. He warned against the danger of routine and seeking human recognition. His greatest fear was that the flame of compassion would die out in the brothers' hearts. So he insisted, "More heart in the hands." This phrase, repeated countless times, became the motto that still inspires the order of the ministers of the sick. Despite constant pain and the wound in his foot, Camillus never allowed illness to excuse him from serving. On the contrary, his vulnerability made him more sensitive to others' needs. He said his ulcer reminded him that everyone depends on divine mercy. This awareness kept him humble and confident in grace's power. His frailty was both wound and blessing. Many times his strength seemed superhuman. When an epidemic struck Rome, Camillus walked streets and hospitals day and night, bringing help and spiritual comfort. Witnesses said he went without food or sleep for long hours, sustained only by faith. Returning from these journeys, he withdrew into silent prayer, laying every pain he witnessed at Christ's feet. This habit of uniting action and contemplation was a hallmark of his spirituality. Those who lived with him reported that, even amid the heaviest tasks, Camillus maintained impressive serenity. His presence conveyed peace, and his gaze reflected genuine compassion. Influential people often sought his counsel or intercession. Despite his reputation for holiness, he never became vain. He welcomed everyone with humility and directed all praise to God. In community life, he demanded discipline and sacrifice, yet was understanding of human weakness. He knew firsthand that God works marvels even in the hardest hearts. His personal conversion story inspired many to start anew. People who had strayed from the faith felt encouraged upon hearing of the man once enslaved by vice who became an apostle of charity. Over time, Camillus drafted rules to secure the congregation's future. He wrote statutes and practical guidelines, always insisting that no rule replace the flame of authentic love. One of the virtues he most cultivated was unconditional trust in divine providence. When financial or internal crises arose, he prayed simply, "If this work is yours, Lord, do not leave us without bread." God confirmed his faith with many small and great miracles of provision. When resources were lacking, unexpected donations arrived. These signs increased the brothers' trust and love for their mission. Though his life was filled with suffering, Camillus kept a joyful heart. He would not let worries erase his smile. He said a Christian must be a sign of hope even in pain. His way of life became a reference for both religious and laity. The dedication to the sick that once seemed madness came to be seen as the gospel lived radically. As the congregation spread, Camillus rejoiced that his mission would reach future generations. Even after his death, others would proclaim God's love to those in need. Although elderly and frail, he insisted on visiting hospitals whenever possible. The brothers tried to persuade him to rest, but he replied, "As long as I have strength, I need to serve." In his final years, he intensified prayer and penance. His union with God grew ever deeper. Many said he seemed to converse with Christ like a close friend. He prepared for death with serenity and confidence, wishing to surrender his soul to the one he had loved in the poor and sick. In the last months of his life, St. Camillus felt his earthly mission ending. His body, weakened by his chronic foot wound, journeys and sacrifices, showed clear exhaustion. Still, his heart remained firm, determined to serve to the end. The Camillian brothers urged him to rest, but he said his greatest joy was to be near the sick, consoling them. Each day of life was another chance to love Christ in the patients. During that time, he often prayed silently before the tabernacle, contemplating Christ's passion. There he found strength to bear the pain and nearness of death. Even limited, he prudently guided the congregation, advising the brothers and urging them never to lose the founding spirit of compassion. He cared most about persevering in charity. He knew his true legacy would be the example of love without limits for those who suffer. He said the only wealth a religious should store was good works done for love of God. News of his illness spread, and many visited for his blessing and prayers. All were welcomed with simplicity and affection. He spoke of the value of suffering offered to God, teaching that illness can purify the soul and prepare the heart for heaven. His own witness made these words convincing. Shortly before death, he gathered his companions, asking them to stay faithful to serving the sick with the fervor he had lived. This final exhortation became a spiritual inheritance. Feeling the end near, Camillus asked for a crucifix. Embracing it, he prayed with a weak yet devout voice. In his final hours, he alternated deep silence with words of surrender and trust in divine mercy. He felt unworthy, but trusted completely in Jesus' love, who came to save sinners. Asked if he feared death, he replied serenely, "I have loved my son, and whoever loves God does not fear." This phrase became famous among his disciples as a summary of his spirituality. On the night of July 13, 1614, St. Camillus de Lellis gave his soul to God at age 64. Witnesses said his face was transfigured with deep peace, as if resting in the Lord's embrace. His death moved Rome. Crowds paid last respects, recognizing in him a true friend of the poor and a model of Christian charity. Many already considered him a saint. He was buried in the Church of the Magdalene in Rome, where his body remains. Many faithful visit his tomb, seeking his intercession for illnesses and troubles. After his death, reports of healings and graces multiplied. The simple called him the Father of the Sick, trusting his power with God. The beatification process began soon after. Numerous testimonies attested to his exemplary life, heroic humility, and boundless love for the sick. In 1742, Pope Benedict XIV declared Camillus de Lellis blessed. In 1746, he was canonized, proclaimed a saint of the Catholic Church. Saint Camillus was named by Pope Leo XIII, patron of the sick, hospitals, and healthcare workers. His example inspires doctors, nurses, and volunteers worldwide. The order he founded continues to grow globally, serving Christ in those who suffer. Lay associations also follow his charism, living compassion and availability in everyday life. His legacy reminds the Church that caring for the sick is a deeply evangelical mission, capable of transforming environments and hearts. Catholic hospitals still bear the Camillian Red Cross as a symbol of crucified love. Though he wrote only simple counsels, his practical witness speaks louder than words. His life proves that God works wonders through fragile, sinful people who open themselves to grace. Remembering his story invites us to rediscover the dignity of human suffering and the beauty of a life lived in charity. St. Camillus de Lellis remains a beacon of hope for all who serve those who suffer.